So what's the temperature at your place?
Uh,
It's
what?
probably about 20 degrees Celsius
Yeah,
right now,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're just coming. We're in autumn at the moment. So
but a nice warm
Right.
autumn. We're northern of Australia, or mid to north.
Yeah. Yeah, actually one of my instructors is coming to Melbourne to put on a course in October.
yes,
Ah,
yeah,
awesome.
we're excited about that. So
Yeah.
We
what
should
was?
talk about that
Yeah,
on the
we will. We'll talk
podcast.
about that in
Yeah.
a second.
Oh, and if you wouldn't mind, this is just a little bit of self-help at the end. I don't know how well known we are in Australia, but there is now a website in Bondi
Yeah,
that sells our books. So I think I passed that along to you.
you did. So I mean, if you don't have it on you, we can just put it straight into the show notes, but we'll touch on it anyway.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, well,
Your hair looks good. We're good to go.
yeah, okay. I was painting yesterday. Well, we can joke about this, but I was spray. See, today is the first day above freezing here
Oh,
this
Wow.
year.
yeah.
And so I was standing out on the ice working on my dock and boathouse because we work on the ice. It's kind of nice not to stand in water. And yes, the temperature just got above freezing, and I was painting, and then the paint blew back at me. My mustache was black, my
Oh,
hands, so I had to get paint thinners and rub it all in my
Oh,
hair and
no
face. Oh,
way.
I looked ghastly. It
Oh, that's
was
a
oh
even my
bit.
own dog wouldn't kiss me last night.
Oh, I
But
can't
we
imagine
can
those
go there if you
fumes.
want. I have to
Yeah.
apologize for my hands.
Oh, that's a good start.
what kind of dog do you have?
Oh, I wish I could bring him down. I'm alone today, so I put him in his kennel. He's 12 weeks old. He's a lab,
Oh,
Oh,
and
cute.
it's a new color. They call him red fox. Have you heard of such a thing?
no.
No.
We'll have to look it up.
Yeah, he's a red fox lab, and he's sort of halfway between a yellow and a chocolate.
Huh.
Oh, wow. That's
That's super
awesome.
cool. I've written it down to look at it. All right. Well, we'll actually get things underway, Stu. Guys, welcome to the G5 podcast. I'm Matthias Turner, joined by co-host Stacey Lee Turner.
Hey, guys.
And today we're super pumped to bring you Dr. Stu McGill from Canada. Stu, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. We were just getting ready to go on air, and I believe this is now day number 2 that we're above the freezing mark here this year.
Absolutely
Are
insane.
you? Have you got heating on right now? I mean, you're wearing a jumper, but have you got like heating
In the
in?
house?
Yeah.
Of course. It's
You'd freeze
it's
otherwise.
it's the windows are still covered in snow. We're
Oh,
snowed
wow.
in
Wow.
still. Yeah.
That's insane.
Far out. So how long does that process take, like, for the snow to go away from now?
It's very fast now.
Okay.
Once it goes above, we don't really have a spring. We go from winter to summer in the
Hmm.
matter of a couple of weeks. So I think we were about minus 20 maybe 10 days ago, and we were snowed in. We had a huge snowfall. It snowed every day for 2 weeks.
No way.
But now, today, the sun's out, and I believe it'll rain in 2 days, and all of this will just start to knock the snow back. And now we're just going to a quick flood season, and then summer.
Yeah.
That's
Or
unreal.
here we have winter and bug season.
Very similar to Australia.
And
Not
I mean, I was going to
surprised.
say, because I asked about heating just because I don't see any radiators on the walls. So have you got kind of reverse, what are they called?
Yeah,
Very
no,
cool.
the all the blowers are in the
Ah,
ceiling
cool.
blow the heat
Awesome.
down. I'm actually when I retired, the headquarters for Backfit Pro moved to my home, so now I live halfway between Toronto and North Bay, and the clinic is now in our house, so that's
That's
where we
unreal.
are now.
Nice and
Awesome.
handy as well. Straight downstairs,
Yeah,
straight upstairs.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
we got a gym downstairs too. It works well.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess to give you a bit more of an introduction, how I heard about you was you're the spine doctor of the world and the specialist in regards to spines in the world. And if anyone ever has an injury in sports, your material is pretty much the best place to go to be able to figure out what's going on and how we can help to fix it. How did your like, how did you come into this? Was there a stage of your life where you had a back pain, and so you kind of delved into it, or were you just interested in it to start with?
Oh, it's the craziest story. Sometimes a career department of a school will say, "Would you come in and talk to our students about how you developed your career?" And I said, "Please, not me. I'm the world's worst example." So my life has been nothing but dumb luck. I never had a vision to become a professor in any way. My whole life was just it was sports that drove it, believe it or not. And when I do something, I think I put a bit of passion into it. I wasn't supposed to go to university. I only went because of sports. And I started in physical education, and because the football coach said, "What would you like to take?" And I said, "I have no interest." And he said, "Good, we'll put you in physical education." And then I started taking some physics and math courses. And long story short, I ended up taking a master's degree in biomechanics. And by that time, I was playing hockey with the professors' team at the University of Ottawa. We played another visiting team, and it's like rugby in Australia.
Yeah.
All the players get together afterwards into the host team's dressing room, and we give them beers. They're our hosts. They've just beaten the heck out of us on the ice, so... And I sat beside a professor from University of Ottawa, and he said, "Oh, why don't you come to my lab, and I'd like to show it to you." And he was just starting spine biomechanics. So that's the silly, dumb story of how I got into spine biomechanics. And obviously I was trained as a scientist. And then as a young professor, different medical groups would ask me to come and tell them what we'd learned about how the spine worked and became injured and that sort of thing. And they said, "Would you see a patient with us?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm not a trained clinician." And they said, "Well, don't worry, we'll be with you." And I learned very quickly that our approach, when we assess a patient, we're really conducting an experiment. We're probing them, we're provoking them, we're trying to understand the true mechanism of their pain, whatever that cause happens to be. And medics don't do that. People may think they do, but they don't. And then I've always had a passion for sport, and slowly I ended up seeing more and more top-level sportsmen, and then different sports organizations and Olympic programs and whatnot would ask would I come in and have a look at a few of their players who were not performing because of back injury. And that's how that sort of thing started. But I never asked for it. They always asked me, would I come and give an opinion and some guidance. So that's how this whole thing has just developed. And I've probably worked at and been at more medical schools than anybody, but it's just been this continual education. And I should say this, your listeners will enjoy this, I think. The typical scientific process is you form a hypothesis and you test it in the laboratory.
Yeah.
Well, I'll admit to you, I have never tested a hypothesis in my life. What I do is I work with an athlete or a person who's really suffering with back pain, and if I can't solve the problem, I then perform experiments to find out, was it a hole in my education, or was it a poor technique that hadn't been developed yet, or whatever. In other words, it was the patients, the coaches, the trainers, the athletes that drove our research program. And
That's
then
awesome.
what we would learn, we would then take it back to the sports arena and to the clinic. It was a terrific synergy. So it was never a formalized scientific process. And at the university, I developed the research clinic right beside the laboratories. So
That's unreal.
that's the story of it. And
it's funny
it
because you talk about kind of dumb luck or like them coming to you, but obviously they're coming to you because you've put in the work and you actually go for a result. And if you can't find out what the result is, you keep digging deeper and deeper. And I think that's I guess it kind of
Different
shows
from
as
the
to
norm.
why, yeah, exactly, why people definitely loved you and kept getting you on board.
I think you might be right.
So, I mean, this is a very broad question, but what causes back pain? I guess maybe we could dive a little deeper into that question and say, like,
Specific examples.
what sorts of back pain do we get to see?
Well, in my world, all back pain has a cause. Now, you may have heard of someone having non-specific back pain. That only means they've never been assessed, or the pain is in your head. That usually means you've been to a clinician who didn't have the skill to figure out your cause, and now they're going to blame you because the pain is in your head. You know, it's awful, the patients who come to me and have been told these terrible things. So what solves all of this is a very thorough assessment. And if it's a good, thorough assessment, it will reveal the cause. So what are the causes? Well, it depends on the person. There's all sorts of causes, but there are obviously categories of pain causation pathways, and they form patterns. So let's take a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids, and a trainer has got her deadlifting, and within 3 months she's deadlifting her body weight, and then she gets back pain. She goes for an MR and she's got a disc bulge. Let's say that category. Well, in that typical pattern, the assessment will show very precisely what spine curvature, what load overdrove her biology and her capacity to cause some breakdown and lead to pain. And then when we probe the pain, we load her in compression. We shape her back into different positions. She may have a radiating pain down her leg because of nerve irritation from the bulge. Then we'll put her in a position to decompress the disc bulge and see if that alleviates the symptoms. Then we watch her deadlift. And we determine, was it too much load, or was it poor form, or was she squatting too deeply so her hips were running out of room, therefore her spine started to bend. If she only pulled off blocks, she would have avoided the stresses that cumulatively led to the disc bulge. So a disc bulge is delamination of collagen fibers. So here's the thing. People are sometimes a bit casual with backs. A ball and socket joint, like a shoulder and a hip, can produce tremendous power through a range of motion. That's what the bearing surface of a ball and socket is designed to do. But a disc is not that at all. They're small fibers stuck together with a ground substance. And too much movement under too much load works the fibers apart, and the fibers will slowly delaminate. And when they delaminate, the nucleus will work through the delaminations and cause a bulge. So there might be an example of what caused back pain. It was very linked to a movement flaw, a poor training program, and the tissue damage that is easily identifiable as the pain pathway. Another one might be quite different. An older fella comes now and says, oh, by the way, the report of that stay-at-home mom with the disc bulge, she would say, sitting at my computer is now painful. It never used to be. Bending over and doing deadlifting is now mimicking the pain. But when I go for a 20-minute walk, my pain goes away. So let's take another patient who comes in. They're 65 years old. I'm a bit partial to that. And they might say, sitting down takes my pain away. And yet it is the standing up and walking that causes my pain. And for them, more typical will be, it's not a discogenic type of pain anymore. It will be a bit of arthritis, perhaps narrowing the spaces that the nerves flow through with movement and that kind of thing. So we will then probe it and figure out exactly the mechanical combinations that create the tissue irritation that becomes so sensitized. They keep because no clinician has showed them how to avoid the pain.
Yeah.
It just keeps, think of picking the scab. It just gets more sensitive and more sensitive. And then, again, it's very popular to say pain is in your head. Well, once in a while, there is that hypochondriac, obsessive kind of person, and, they have a little ache, and they are probing their back, trying to search for the pain. And yeah, so there are those as well. And once in a while, we will just have to say to them, look, you do have a pain trigger. Here's how to wind it down, but you're going to have to get on with life a little bit. But anyway, there's 3 categories.
Yeah, that's
good. The assessment just nails it, and you can show them exactly what they need to do to wind down their pain and then build up their capacity once again.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned a bulge disc. What's the difference between a slipped disc and a bulging disc?
Nothing. So the medics use terrible language. Nothing has ever slipped. A bulge disc is when you see it, that's what it looks like, and they just use the word slip. So nothing slips in or out. However, the nucleus, which is the middle of the disc, is a gel. And if there's too much motion and too much load, the collagen fibers tend to delaminate, and the nucleus will flow through the delaminations and create a bulge. I'll just show you a disc bulge here if I can. So can you see that little red mark at the end of my finger at the back of that disc? Yeah. So that is where the fibers have delaminated. Now I'm going to bend the disc forward, and you see it open up and the bulge is then created. But if the person doesn't flex through their spine, but they flex through their hips, I can now squeeze the whole joint without flexing it, and you'll see the disc squeezes, but the gel hydraulically is not driven posteriorly because you're shaping the wedge of the disc in a way that doesn't create that posterior migration. But people can have an anterior bulge, a posterior bulge.
So for the listeners, anterior is forward and posterior is backward.
Yes. Or you could have the type, imagine your car tire has lost a little bit of air. So when you drive on the road, it bulges everywhere. And some people will lose disc height. They might have damage to the end plate. And the disc squeezes down, so it bulges everywhere. But that is a compressive mechanism. You may have heard of this recent book I wrote called Gift of Injury with Brian Carroll. Yeah. And Brian was had many records in powerlifting, and he had actually split his sacrum with compression driven down through the thrust line of the disc. And if I can align this up with the camera here, I'm just going to squeeze this particular model. The disc gel has been dyed a blue, and can you see it migrate through the fracture into the vertebral body as I squeeze?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was Brian's injury. And by the way, all of these models that describe very specifically the link between mechanical overload, tissue damage, and pain, they're all made by Dynamic Disc Designs, which I don't have anything to do with the business, but they're a very clever group that takes the mechanisms as we document them in the laboratory, and then they're able to create models to demonstrate to people, to show them, here's what the cause is. Now, here's what you can do to mitigate the cause, and then allow healing to take place, or adaptation, or whatever it is. But this game of training and getting the tissues to adapt is a never-ending source of fascination. So if you want to train with weights, you need stiffer ground substance between the collagen fibers and the discs. You need to toughen them. which is the opposite of yoga. So, I don't have anything against yoga, but you're adapting the collagen to be very mobile. So the ground substance between the fibers become lax, which gives you great spine mobility. But it allows them to delaminate, and you'll get a disc bulge sooner if you use heavy weight. So
someone doing yoga should just drop down their weights a little bit then? Like not be pushing for one
well,
things like that?
Absolutely, yes. See, this is not a ball and socket joint. Disc actually follows the laws of fabric. So my shirt is a fabric, and if I wanted to loosen the fibers, I just work it back and forth like this, and slowly the fibers. And then if I really stressed it, it would tear.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of an illustration of, and not a great one, but it gives you the idea of what happens with disc. So yoga pushes the end range, which is great. If you want to dance and move and perhaps do some really end range gymnastics, fabulous. Train with body weight, play jujitsu, these kinds of things. You'll notice the great jujitsu masters don't lift heavy weights, but they're absolute anacondas, boa constrictors, and they'll tie you up in knots and crush you. But they don't do it with muscle. They do it with tremendous flexibility and but if you're going to lift heavier weights now, you'd be much wiser to adapt the collagen to be a little stiffer. And then, you get to the extreme where you have a power lifter who can squat over 1,000 pounds, but they have problems sticking their finger in their ear because they can't tie their shoes.
Yeah.
They have to wear slip-ons. They can't reach down that far. So people have to decide a little bit where they want their peak adaptation to be. And if they do it right, they'll have optimal spine health. But if they do it wrong, there's another answer to the question you just asked, what causes back pain. Mixing up and not tuning that adaptation is a big one.
Can I also add, though, that it can depend on what type of yoga that somebody's doing, based off of, are they doing an alignment based? Are they pushing to end range? That sort of thing. I mean, obviously what you're saying is extremely valid, but being somebody who does both yoga and CrossFit, and I'm sure there's many others in the community, that as long as they're not doing stuff that's hyper extending their spine and going to those end range positions, if they would still be stabilizing, or is it
well, stabilizing is the wrong word. That's I can talk about that if you like. That's not the correct use of that word.
Yep.
But if you're talking about resilience to do certain things, no, you're always in a game of trade-off.
Okay.
And what you gain on one, you're going to have to give up on another. So. But what I was thinking of there was more traditional yoga. I mean, that's a sloppy word to use, and shouldn't really use it because it's like saying stabilization exercise. Well, what the heck is that? And what the heck is yoga? So, but if we got very specific and said, this particular exercise for that particular person. And
because I guess a lot of CrossFitters are doing Rumwat these days with, a lot of, there's no
long
spine stuff.
stretches.
It's more like hip opening and shoulder opening, which is more the ball and socket stuff. So if they're doing those like stretches to sort of open up the joints that stop them from getting range of motion when they're squatting, are they still missing out on the generating the correct resilience through their spine in doing that kind of stuff?
I think I understand your question. Could you just ask it again so I know I'm locked right on target?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I heard from that is you're focusing with more motion in the ball and socket joint, shoulders and hips, and less in the back. Is that what I was hearing?
100%.
Yeah. Well, that now you're just starting to identify the patterns that form great athleticism. Yeah. You look at. When a pro athlete, and we watch them and we work with them, and they get a sore knee or they get a sore hip, the spine might be soon to follow now because instead of getting full mobility out of the hip, they're starting to use their back more. And I'll give you a fun little experiment. We've done this 2 or 3 times now. Go to a group of athletes and say, who have a little bit of back pain, and you'll say, get on the elliptical trainer. Do you like it? Does your back like it? Or does it make your back more sick? Now, what you'll find is some will say, no, I hate the elliptical. It really flares up my back. And the other half will say, no, I really like it. When you measure their hip mobility, you'll find the ones who really like the elliptical, they have a lot of hip mobility. But the ones with stiff hips, when they get on the elliptical, their spine now has to gyrate because their hips are running out of room.
Would that pattern matching move across to their running as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when a sprinter tears a hamstring and does something else, and then either they preceded or followed with back pain, this was all a link. And the stresses follow through the linkage. Absolutely.
That's crazy. Would you say that a lot of back pain comes from people just not being able to flex correctly, like they're flexing through the spine and not flexing through the hips, as you were talking about before?
Well, it depends. If we're lifting heavy weights, the answer is absolutely yes. Now, if we're not lifting weights and the person is just going through life, they're a stay-at-home mom, they pick their kids up, well, that's probably a bad example. You better lift well if you're going to pick your child up. But if you're just not really being testing of your body, so you live a pretty mild life. It probably doesn't matter if you don't have good form when you move. But when you start putting load on it, and if you do that with bad form, think of every time you've got hurt, you were out of position.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the first part of the story. In terms of it breaks your body down because it creates tremendous stress concentrations when you're out of form. But it probably doesn't matter till you have load on your body anyway. That's one of the criticisms I know that I often get. But the people who are making the criticism have never worked with me or never, tried to understand. It's if you've got load, you better be good. I just had another thought in my mind that was very, very important, and now I've forgotten it.
Think of your little baby toe. Apparently, that helps it to come back.
No,
didn't work.
So I said load is important. Oh, here's another thing about that. Now let's shift that to performance for just a minute.
Yeah.
And you did, Stacy, mention the word spine stability. I hope I get to formalize that a little bit more in a few minutes. But here's the robber of performance. I see the World's Strongest Man for 2018 just came out. And it didn't just come out, it came out a few weeks ago, but it was in Africa this year. And one of the tasks was the lads had to get under a 750-pound yoke and squat it for reps to a certain depth. I don't know if you saw it. So they failed somewhere around 11 to, I think, 17 reps. And it was so interesting. Look at the rep that they failed on and then go to the preceding rep. And that's where you'll see what happened. Every single time, say they got to 12 reps and 12 was their last rep, you watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all perfect. Number 11, they lose a little bit of control and stability. Hip shifts, they get a little bit loose in their core, and then they struggle that last rep out. And then the next one, they're done. What happened? The brain, when it senses a loss of core stability, it shuts down the neural drive to the hips. So you can't get hip power if you can't get a stiffened, stable core. So again, these are things that, the experts who live in their mother's basements, as I call them, and they're on Facebook and whatnot, claiming all of these things. They've never measured these things as I think we have. So anyway, there's just a couple of thoughts. One from a pain injury perspective, and one on a performance perspective.
Yeah, and so the hip shift in the squat, where, for instance, you move to the side a little bit and the left maybe takes a little higher stance than what the right hip does as you're squatting, what would that usually come to? Is that like a deficiency in the lat, a deficiency in the core? Like, whereabouts is that actually usually coming from?
Well, that was just the shift that happened in the rep before failure.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that could be several things. It could be hardware, as you're describing. A line of drive was an error, or quadratus lumborum was getting a bit tired, and frontal plane strength, or it could be any of those things, or it could have been software. In other words, their brain got a little bit tired, and their ability to maintain perfect engrams. So the engram is the movement. That's the neuronal connections that form that representative movement. I mean, you walk, you don't think about it. You're simply running the tape. So that tape is the engram. But when you get tired, the engram also loses its pristine precision. And again, it doesn't matter if you're just walking down the street, but it matters when you're under 750 pounds.
Yes.
And I guess, building on from what you're saying, it's one thing to be constantly moving in an incorrect pattern versus these guys who they did 10 perfect reps and then it was 11 that was a little shifty because they were fatigued. Would you say they're two different
you cut
scenarios?
out me there. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat. Am I cutting out on you?
No, you're good.
No, yeah, it's all right.
Oh, you cut out on me mid-sentence. Sorry, Stacy.
No worries. So to build on what you were just saying, I guess there's one type of person who might be always moving incorrectly, so there'd be a hip shift every single time, versus these, really strong athletes who every rep was perfect until they failed because they were fatigued. So there's difference there.
Well, there's a fellow, quite a famous lifter. He's just going, I know because I'm in it, he's going to do a little movie on this. And what we detected in him was the hip labrum was giving him difficulty, not midline, but more medial. And as he got to this level, he then had to shift away from it. And he kept saying, oh, I've got this odd bar dip now down to my right side. And I said, really, let's watch you lift. And all these coaches were telling him to fix this and fix that. And I said, really, let me examine your hips. So all I did was a hip scour exam, determined, he had pain right there, and then we had a look at the labrum, and of course it was quite damaged. So it was a pinch point causing pain. He moved away from it. He had to shift his hips. It was on every rep. The bar dipped. His performance went to hell, and he had to come and see me as a back patient. So there's it's a house of cards. But you see, it was the assessment once again. No one had ever given him a thorough assessment. So they were just throwing darts as to what the answer was. And I can't work that way. I have to hone in very precisely and make sure I understand why.
And what percentage would you see there's lower back pain compared to mid or upper back pain when it comes to sport in particular?
Yeah, well, I can't answer that because of the biased world I live in, Maddie. I'm just a low back guy, so everyone I see has low back.
Yeah.
Now, they may have comorbid mid back, a right knee, and but I don't see, if someone had a neck or a shoulder problem, they would go to some expert on that, and it's not me.
Yeah. I would say that a lot of the crew in the gyms that I've worked in and seen with back injuries, lower back injuries in particular, it's a lot of the time related to incredibly tight hips. And that's not to say that they weren't moving bad when they were doing it, but it's usually the fix is through loosening the hips. We can start to see a lot of relief on the spine. Is that kind of a common fix that you see a lot of times with lower back pain?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right on.
Yeah, okay, cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now, the next question is, are the hips fixable?
Mm.
And if see, it's a chicken and an egg thing. Maybe the hips were getting stiff, and that caused back pain. And now they're even using the hips more, and it's a downward spiral. But can I mention something that's very informative of the link between hips and backs that links neurology with mechanics?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, have you heard of Vladimir Janda, the great
Yes.
Czechoslovakian neurologist?
Uh-huh.
Janda proposed the crossed pelvis syndrome, but he only proposed it. He never measured it. He didn't use electromyography and that sort of thing. But we were the first to measure these things, I believe. And I should also say there was also some other experimental work done in the knees. In that knee pain, when you're squatting and doing those sorts of things, it tended to shut down VMO. So that's called neurogenic inhibition, and you've probably heard of this.
Mhm.
So the correctives would be to try and re-correct the engram and bring VMO back into play. So Yonda said hip pain and back pain. Well, actually, he said just back pain, I believe. It inhibited the gluteal muscles and it facilitated the flexors. Well, when we measured all of this, it was very interesting. It did neurogenically inhibit the gluteals in a lot of people. So hip pain and back pain both cause neurogenic inhibition of the glutes. The brain forgets to use them. So we have a hardware driving a software corruption of the engram. So there's a pretty good link going on now. It's starting to get interesting and complicated. And then the facilitation of the flexors turned out to be just psoas. It wasn't iliacus or rectus femoris, it was just psoas. And psoas, as you know, goes all the way up the spine.
Yeah.
So when you said get hip mobility, I would see people, stretching the hip and doing, Bulgarian splits and these kinds of things, instead of actually targeting the psoas, putting the hand overhead, dropping the shoulder back. You probably can't see, but I was spinning my hand around in different directions here to see if the fascial connection was tightening or loosening. So, I mean, there's so much interesting things going on there and variations between people. But anyway, there would be an example where you have to specifically target and release psoas. You have to specifically target and activate the gluteals. Well, how do you do that now? And then our research showed that that really was a superior technique for releasing psoas. And then Yonda's routines of the clamshell done in the very mindful way that he taught and we tried to carry on with. And then the hip thrusts with the engrams as we're describing them to re-engage. And people might say, well, is it really that big a deal? Well, it actually is, because when you've inhibited the gluteal muscles, if I get out of the chair, and I'm going to get out of the chair now with, there's a hamstring-centric rise out of the chair. Looks like a crappy deadlift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But anyway, the hamstrings, when they extend the hips, they push the femoral head and glide it anteriorly into impingement. Whereas when you reactivate the glutes and pull through with the glutes now, they tend, because of their line of action, they pull the femoral head off of impingement. So the corrective, say you're doing one of Dan John's goblet squats or whatnot, very important to keep cueing the glutes and driving them with your little toys like bands perhaps or something like that. Because now what started out with a bit of hip pain and back pain inhibited the glutes. Now we've gone back into positive feedback to feed the anterior impingement of the hip. you see, it just keeps on
Keeps
going,
going,
one
yeah.
after the other. So the mechanic driving the neurology, driving the flawed mechanic, driving further neurology, and the pain just keeps winding up. And then some kid will say, "Oh, you can't squat very deep. Do ankle mobility." I don't know.
So, I mean, an effective release, because obviously we're talking about the hips and you showed us a stretch. And we've also found, correct me if you think that this is not
That's
ideal.
not far off a yoga move, by
Exactly.
the way.
Right, hip focus.
Stacey.
Yes.
So, I'm not hard on yoga
No, I
because,
know.
of course, we pull out specific tools
Yes.
from the yoga, Pilates, gymnastics world. Of course we do, because, no one owns movement. It's just
No, exactly.
But it makes me very happy to hear you talk about that stuff, because I never liked the twisty stuff and the very flexy and roundy. I always preferred the very neutral spine positions. So that was just interesting, to reinforce, to keep my resilience for my weightlifting. It's very good to now reinforce that message.
With yoga, yeah.
But also we found that using trigger point release into psoas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, correct me if you think that this is a bad technique, but that point halfway between belly button and hip point, we use a lacrosse ball and lay on it and lift.
Or the corner of a kettlebell is another
Or the
good
corner
one.
of a kettlebell and lift that leg of the side that you've got for the psoas release. And
Is this
relief
in your back, the ball, or the front?
in the front.
In-
And laying on top,
into
face
the
down.
hip, yeah.
Have you heard of that one before?
No.
Ah, okay.
Our therapists go in there with
In
their
the
hands, though.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've been
Very
playing
much
around.
so.
Okay. So we've been
I
playing
haven't
around with
heard of
self.
lacrosse ball.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah,
that's
so-
self-release.
Self-release, and I've always I actually suffered from a back injury a few years ago, and that was one of the best things I could do for it was just releasing that psoas.
Really
was really
Directly,
beneficial.
locally, rather than doing heaps of hip stretches.
Mm.
Well, there, of course. Now, I don't have the manual skills to go in and release muscles very strategically. And there are some people who are absolute gifted masters at doing this. And there's also others who just make one hell of a mess and stir up a nest. And, someone will say, oh, those manual therapists are terrible. But it was only the manual therapist that they happened to go to. There are some wizards who, I'll be with, say, a top Olympian, and I've done all I can do, but they just have the last little snag in, say, a quadratus lumborum or a psoas or something like that. And when I send them to the right manual therapist, it's just magic that gets unleashed out of their body. So, but
awesome.
do you want an opinion on lacrosse balls?
Yeah.
Don't use them on your back.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know anything about doing them on your latissimus dorsi, or let's take foam rollers. Let's broaden this out just a little bit.
Mhm.
Please don't foam roll your back, your low back. I've had far too many patients now who have foam rolled their low back, and they've created enormous spine stability. So when you foam roll and you put full body weight on spinous process after spinous process, that's how you create instability. Now, instability is a laxity of the joint. Now, I'll talk about instability if you want, but this is just one form of it, where joints create micro movements. So if I take this pelvic ring and lumbar spine, I'm just going to push it now from behind. Can you see well enough that very little motion takes place here and here? It all happens at this joint right there.
Yeah.
And that joint has got a little bit of disc damage. I'm going to bend it from the side, and you see exactly the same thing. And when I twist, in other words, all the micro movements are now occurring at a stress concentration at that one joint. Can you imagine how lacrosse balls and foam rollers pushing on individual spinous processes create that laxity across a joint? It's not something that people should be doing with a lumbar spine, and I've had far too many people now quite painful, and they've lost their athleticism because they can't bear load now. And it takes a long time for that to stiffen up. Why do people do it? You get if you can fire off the stretch reflex in the muscle, you'll get 20 minutes or so of analgesia. So you get a false read on that now. Oh, I just got relief for 20 minutes, not realizing that you just paid a price now for putting a point load. It's not a good idea.
Okay, that's.
But as I
good
said,
to know.
I don't care about other parts of the body. I'm not qualified to talk about them.
No, definitely. That's very useful information, though. And I think the other thing is people try to mobilize a bit too much before they even train, which would put the joint in I guess, a more stretched state that might not be strong. It's not whether the joint is super strong in position. And so
A more lax state. You're right.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's probably best if you were to do mobility to do it away from training. So maybe after training's fine, or a time when you're not about to go train. But if you're doing it just before training, it's probably not the best time to be doing it.
Well, why would someone warm up before they trained? And that's not a facetious question. It's a very real question,
To
because
prepare
when I
the
see
body.
it, exactly.
Yeah.
So now, how much laxity do you want? Because here's the thing: if I was to do just fall into the table, boing, boing, and create that kind of a tuned elasticity in my body, one that can explode. So the hammer of the muscle hits a stone and really creates performance. You stretch before you do all of that, and you've just created laxity in your body, and you've lost all the neurology and the whole neural prime.
Yeah.
So if you're an explosive kind of athlete, stretching is a killer. I've had several marathoners over the years. I think of the last one I had was he was just about the best in his whole country. And when I'm working on their backs and programming and whatnot, I usually say, can you tell me what the weakest part of your game is? And I just want to see if I can incorporate that into while we're trying to deal with your back. And he said, well, okay, the first 2 miles of my marathon are really subpar. They're not very good. And I have to fight for the rest of the 21 miles, or however the arithmetic goes. And he says, that's how I win. He says, I fight those last 21 miles. And then I said, really? And the lightning flash just went off in my brain. And I said, show me your warm-up. And he was doing mobility and stretching. Instead of bounding along using his elastic tissues to store and recover, he was using muscle to eccentrically contract, concentrically. It was terrible.
Yeah,
And
that's
it wasn't
crazy.
until he tuned. So look, athletes tune the elasticity in their body. So the whole warm-up is to tune the springs.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can have a whole different discussion now about warm up and mobility and stretching.
Yeah, definitely. That's super cool, and I think it's very insightful for many people. And so, like in a general warm up for someone doing their sport focused, what would you be looking for as a beneficial warm up for someone? Say, for instance, no, we won't even say specific, just specific to their sport. What should they be looking for?
Right. Well, if you gave me a specific person warming up for a specific sport, I could give you a very specific warm up, but you're not. It's generic. So here's a generic warm up. The first thing to do is to think biomechanically.
Yeah.
So round out the joints, get things moving in your body to reduce stress concentration. So if I was standing for 20 minutes, the cartilage in my knee would actually have deformed into a small dent where I was standing on it. So if I just did, walking, swinging, that kind of thing, it would round out the cartilage and take the stress concentration out of the dent. So there would be an example of general, gentle movement to take the stress concentrations out. The second level is physiological. Now you've got to get the blood pressure up to competitive level, the hormone state to compete. If it might be the acid balance, I don't know. It depends whether they're aerobic athlete or not. But you're thinking physiology for the second programming stage.
Yeah.
The third programming stage is all neural. Now it's time to prime the body, get ready to explode. So if it's a power lifter, you might scream, get slapped in the face, really bang. If you're a boxer, you might take a sniff of ammonia. If you're, again, a jumper, you're just tuning get those hamstrings even tighter. So you just bounce off the ground. And of course, there's mental preparation and priming and all of this as well. But there's the 3 layers of a generic warm-up. Now, of course, when we get into a specific, but I would say in the United States, I'm Canadian, I'm not American, but very much in the United States, they over-warm up.
Yeah.
They do far too much useless things, not enough of the real charging, priming, and some of them are actually tired by the time their form is actually deteriorated because of the warm-up. Then in the Eastern European system, the warm-up is, generally speaking, much more brief, much more targeted, much more explosive. Bang, 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 okay, let's go and lift, or whatever it happens to be. So it's very interesting to contrast the two.
Yeah, I was super surprised when I started working with a powerlifting coach, and he was like, literally for the warm up, we did some basic activation drills. We did some breath work just to get like the mind ready, and then we literally hit it. Like it was a 5-minute, if even, warm up, and I was like, oh, but we haven't done any exercise yet.
Stretched,
yeah, exactly. We haven't done all the stuff, and he's like, no, you don't want to. And that was my first like aha moment that really helped me out with my training. And from there, I saw
injuries,
exactly. I saw really good results, which is crazy.
It's incredible how you can potentiate performance. Who struggle to do a chin-up, and then suddenly we just got 6 out of them, or they've just bench pressed another 10% of their lifetime best, and all we really did was prepare their bodies for that lift very briefly and very focused and very concentrated, and they just hadn't ever been taught how to densify that neural drive out of their brain and charge it through their body to get that Herculean performance.
Super powerful for any athlete out there. For people who may be suffering from SIJ pain compared to
sacroiliac joint.
Exactly.
Not everyone
pain.
knows what SIJ is.
Sorry, instead of
back, right
spinal pain. Say for instance, like the left side is being favored. What would that potentially be?
Well, I'm just going to reach across and get my pelvic model because it has 2 SI joints in it here.
Yeah.
Well, most of the time of the people that I see and report sacroiliac pain, it's not the sacroiliac joints, and we assess it and we find out. So I'll go back and forth now and explain it. The bottom 2 vertebra, their nerve roots form the sciatic root. The sciatic root comes down around the back of the SI joints and then behind through the buttock and behind the hip joint. Mm-hmm. So they'll say, oh, well, I've got SI joint. And as soon as we tension those nerve roots, they get the SI pain. And I say, but that's not SI. That's all referred sciatic pain. And if I say, let's do this, I'm going to shape your spine a bit differently. We're going to decompress the disc a little bit. Guess what? Their SI joint pain suddenly cleaned up. Now, if your SI joint pain comes and goes quite quickly, it's probably not SI joint pain. SI joints are kind of like facet pain. They come on slowly and they desensitize quite slowly as well. When things come on quite quickly, like someone stuck a knife in your back, these are more discogenic signs than they are SI or facet joint. Yeah. But now watch this. You know that there's been a lot of discussion about, bilateral squats are hard on your back and your pelvis. You should do one-legged work and split squats and lunges and all this kind of thing. Well, when you do a lunge, so a lunge is I'm doing this kind of a thing. This half of my pelvis mutates back. Yep. This half of my pelvis mutates forwards. Well, you can imagine some people who train and think more is better. So let's do a few split lunges. Then we're going to put 50 kilos in each hand and do a few more. Then, oh, why the hell, why not let's do 100 reps per side? You know, it's something crazy like this. So what they've done is, if I can do this, do you see the SI joints moving now as I move one side forward and the other back?
Yeah.
This puts tremendous stress on the SI joints. I had a power lifter who was pretty much top in their country as well. It was a female. Was that 2 weeks ago? And her pelvic ring was on fire. And I said, do you do a lot of split lunge work? And she said, well, that's been my go-to for the last 2 years. And I said, yes, it shows. You've now lost your ability to bear heavy load. So she had loosened, because of the excess in split squats, she'd loosened her SI joints. So when I squeeze the iliac crest like this on her, do you see how this compresses the top of the SI joints and cracks open the bottoms? That made her feel good. She said, oh, could you just keep your hands there? I can go back. And then I went down to her greater trochanters down here, and I did the same squeeze, and she almost fell to the floor.
Yeah.
So that opened up the top of the SI joint and it squeezed the bottoms. And then I did what we call the fist test. So she lays on the exam table. I put my fist, I mean, this gets pretty personal, but I put my fist directly on the sacrum. And then this hand shapes the lumbar spine so I don't get a false read out of the sciatic roots. And then I pulse like this, boom, boom, and it pulses the sacrum through the pelvic ring, and that too was highly positive. So these are direct loads on the SI that I prove whether or not. So if I can go through those provocations and there's no pain out of the SI joints, and then I pull on the sciatic nerve root during a leg raise test, and I'll internally rotate the foot and all this kind of thing, and then pull her head off the table like that. She goes, oh yeah, that's the pain. I'll say, these are not your SI joints. Even though you thought they were, your chiropractor has been treating them, but you're coming to me because everyone else has failed.
And so for someone who wants to try and strengthen glutes, for instance, and then not getting the activation through squats, what would be your next go-to? So you talked about the clamshells and your hip thrust before. Would they be kind of the go-tos for you mostly for glute strength?
Yes, there's been many groups around the world who've tried different techniques for activating the glutes. I think I've evaluated them all. I don't need to argue this now. Yonda was right. The clamshell, but it's quite a specific technique. I'm on a training exam table here, by the way. But you put the thumb on the ASIS, which targets the fingers to the high glute. You go into a clamshell position. Now, you stiffen the core first. So when the person twists their spine to bring their pelvis around, this is a problem. Now we start getting TFL and some of the other things. So lock the core and bring it around only with the high glute now. Yeah. So some people call it gluteus medius. The neuromuscular compartments of the glutes aren't really separated between glute med and glute max and glute min. There's more of just two compartments, one for walking and external rotation and that kind of thing. And then the glute bridge, I have them on their back. I have them push their toes away through knee extension into my foot, and then I palpate their hamstrings. Now, just doing a back bridge doesn't guarantee glutes at all. I feel if the hamstrings are active. And if they're pushing their heels down into the ground, that tends to activate the hamstrings. This is not what you want. So we have them flat-footed on the floor, and they're pushing their toes away. Using their quadriceps, so now the glutes must come on. And we get much more facilitation doing that. There's a couple of videos out of me coaching these various techniques. I think in our enhancing performance, or I think it might be in the assessment video as well. But nonetheless, there's a very specific set of instructions, and then you palpate and you either are successful or not. And then once the person becomes very gluteal centric, they can keep them active going up and going down, then they might go to a one leg back bridge, for example. But, having said this, some people will never be successful, and that's okay. If you take a road cyclists have wonderful quadriceps and hamstrings and no gluteals. You don't use glutes riding a bike until you get out of the saddle and power up a hill, for example, standing. You know what I mean? So we don't worry about those kinds of athletes if they don't really get gluteal centric. But if you're a lifter, there's no option.
Exactly. The best squatters always have the biggest glutes.
Exactly. If you're a rugby player, there's no option. If you're playing tennis, there's no option. So there you go. It depends on the person a little bit.
Yeah, it's super insightful. It's good. Was it you who posted the study based on hips and being able to tell ancestral where someone was from, like where you could almost look back?
Well, I think I was the first to make that link, but it didn't come. The first line of evidence didn't come from the sport world. It actually came from orthopedic disease. So I was looking at the highest incidence of hip dysplasia, and it turned out across Caucasian Europe, it was Poland. Well, I've worked with a few Polish national lifters. I know their hips. They have a fabulous deep squat. So when I used to do hip exams in the hip scour test, their knee would come right up and fall right into their armpit. It always used to impress me. And then the same with the Ukrainian athlete. It was fabulous. But they have the highest rate of hip dysplasia, very shallow hip sockets. So you detect that anatomy when you do the hip exam on them. Then when we go to the athletic arena and I measured power production out of the deep squat, that shallow hip architecture produces tremendous power out of the hole. You don't see that kind of architecture failing at the beginning in an Olympic lift. Now you might, interestingly enough, you'll see them tending to fail more at lockout if you're doing a deadlift, for example. Now I'm going to take the polar opposite of orthopedic disease, and that's FAI, femoral acetabular impingement. Do you know where the highest incidence rate in the world is? It's the Celtic nations. It's Normandy, France, which is where most of the medical studies are done, and then Scotland and Ireland. Well, you can guess from what my name is where the majority of my genes are from. Well, I don't know if you know, I've been down the athletic route. I've got hip replacement. I had terrible impingement, broke the labrums, and it's what you get when you squat heavy and go too deep.
Yeah.
So, and then when you measure the power production out of the very deep socketed hip, it's terrible out of the hole. But boy, when they get the weight past the knees, they kick into second gear and you're away. You don't see those guys fail at lockout. You see them fail at the initial part of the pull. So the anatomy, the leverage, the biomechanics, the orthopedic disease, it all is linked and related. So that's when I put together that first thought on all of this. And now when I do my courses, I'll usually say, is there anyone here with both parents from Poland? And is there anyone here with both parents from Scotland? And it shows very, very quickly. And then we do a pelvic rock test, which is you're on your hands and knees and you rock your buttocks back to your heels. And you'll see if the hip sockets are deep, they get to about 90 degrees, and that's it. The hips are now run out of room, and the spine starts to stress and curve. So if you're under 1,000 pounds, I hope you enjoy your pain. Or you limit. I mean, the cure to this is, if you're a power lifter, no one pays you $1 million to squat deeply. All you have to do is get a legal squat.
Yeah.
Enough said. But if you're an Olympic lifter, God chooses Olympic lifters, not the lifter.
Hmm.
Mm.
To get down and have that shoulder mobility with that hip flexor mobility, that's you've been touched by the hand of God or born in Poland. Well,
There's
I'm being a bit facetious with that because
it's
people,
good
people have taken this. Oh, well, I have a Polish friend, and they can't lift. And look, that's not the point. The point is, I've just given national averages. This biological spectrum is still there in both countries. But the point is, you do the exam and you figure it out. You do the assessment. Assessment cures. Every discussion we've had is appropriately addressed with a thorough exam.
So
And if it's thorough, it'll show you why.
with the assessment, how can people kind of get onto this? Is it through doing one of your courses?
Well, that's one way. If the, I mean, as you may know, my early textbooks were all written for the clinical crowd. I wrote
Yeah.
them for medics. And then some savvy lay people would get their hands on them and say, could you possibly write a book for the lay public? And I struggled with that because how am I going to teach the lay public to do the assessment? Well, it took me about 5 years. It was the hardest book I ever wrote, but it was Back Mechanic. Now, I wrote that for the lay public, and Chapter 6 guides them through a self-assessment. And it's 9 tests. Some are loaded, some are extreme range of motion, and they show the person where their pain occurs. Then, based on their specific pain triggers, we show them what not to do. That's the most important thing. Don't do exercise, get rid of the cause. That's usually moving a different way, sitting differently, standing, walking, etc. So then we wind the pain down and we show them, here's how to get on and off the toilet. Here's how to put your socks on. Here's how to brush your teeth. Because they'll tell you, the last time I bent forward to flush a toilet, someone put a knife in my back. And they're clueless. They didn't realize that they were so sensitized that if they only used their hips to bend forward, they were absolutely bulletproof. Instead, the medic who didn't know any better said, oh, it's in your head, just keep moving. And the person was in a terrible psychological cognitive dissonant state because they thought the pain was in their head, which is it's just tragic what this current trend is doing to people. But anyway, having said all of that, then we tune their bodies with strategic stability and mobility. So you've already mentioned mobile hips. Yes. How you do that, of course, we have the ways that we've measured to be, at least of all the ones that we've measured to be the best, with strategic stability here. Absolutely non-negotiable, and there's reasons for that. Then the last little bit is to get it to transfer to real life in patterns of things like pushing and pulling and carrying. And, it may not be really important for stay-at-home mom to do a deadlift. It might be really important for her to know how to lift her 2-month-old out of the crib at 2 o'clock in the morning for feeding. That's the biggest thing in her life. Anyway, it's a little bit of a lecture, but I had to write that book to start off. Here's how you can do a self-assessment. And of course, to learn my full assessment, well, we do a 2-day master course, but that's to be a master clinician on assessing back pain. And then I have some PhD students, Ed Cambridge, who now teaches with me, he worked with me side by side for 6 years. So there's a...
And Ed's the one that's coming out to Australia to deliver your course, right?
Actually, Ed is coming, but not at that time. It's Joel Proskowitz. Now, Joel was with me 12 years.
Jesus.
So Joel's coming out, and his course is called Training the Back Pain Client.
And that's in October in Sydney?
Melbourne.
Oh, Melbourne, sorry.
No, but it's going to be, I think we're going to do Sydney as well on that trip. But we've the ink is dry, so Melbourne for sure. That's October 20 and 21.
Hmm.
I'm only going from memory here, so that's subject to question. But anyway, yeah, Joel Proskowitz will be there with training the back pain client. And I believe he will do it in Sydney either the week before or the week after. And then he goes and does it in Asia and a couple of other places on that tour.
That's unreal.
Awesome.
We'll look out for that for sure.
Now,
And so how can people get involved with that one?
I don't know. Just go to our website, backfitpro.com, and look under courses.
Perfect.
And it will be listed there.
Now, recently within Australia, there's been a website that's been uploaded with your books now.
In
So you
Bondi?
can now purchase the books within Australia. Or you could already if you shipped them, but now it's a lot easier.
Oh, what killed us is the shipping.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, if you buy a book from Amazon, it's just crazy. You're paying as much for the shipping as you are for the book, maybe even more. So I know I would get, folks from Australia saying, well, we're getting all our buddies together. Could you ship 5 books over? And, that kind of thing. But we did finally get a distributor in Bondi, which is a suburb of Sydney, I believe.
Yeah.
And they have all the books, and they just send them out now with the Australian Postal Service.
Yeah.
But if you go to BackFit Pro and click on the Australian flag, you can. It takes you right.
Automatically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's unreal. One last thing. Actually, there's a few more things, but I guess one thing that I did want to touch on was surgery, and in particular, disc fusion. Is this something that should be tried to be avoided at all costs? Is there a reason? Like, obviously, there's a reason for having disc fusion, but how should we try to,
What's
get
your
away
opinion
from
on
this?
it?
Yeah, what's your opinion around them?
Well, my opinion's quite data-based.
Mm-hmm.
So, of the people who get sent to me and they've been told, well, you've tried physio, you've tried the trainer, you've been to the orthopedic surgeon, you've been to the psychologist, all of these treatments, nothing's worked. So the last thing for you now is to go ahead and have a fusion surgery. Of all of those people we got 95% of them to avoid it. And they were happy they did. So there's the statistic, and I know this because the clinic that I ran at the university, we followed up with every patient we ever saw. Yeah. So we know exactly what our success rate is, and I can stand by that. Mm-hmm. So how did we do that? We started playing a game called virtual surgery. So instead of actually cutting them with a knife, you just are very dramatic and you touch them on the shoulder and say, good, there's your surgery. Now, tomorrow, you're going to behave like a post-surgical patient. You're going to take it easy. You're going to get out of bed. You're going to go to the toilet. In other words, we're going to build you back, just like post. Now, surgery works in a lot of people, particularly those with type A personalities, because it's forced rest. Again, you have someone coming in and they say, oh, well, I can't take a week off the gym because I just won't do that. And I said, well, a surgeon will force you to do it because you'll have to. So I said, look, if I gave you surgery right now, would you go and ride the elliptical at the gym tomorrow? And they said, well, no, I guess not. And I said, good, you're starting to understand my point. And so we slowly build them back, and 95% of them. Now we build them back following the program in back mechanic, which was understand the cause of their pain and show them how to move in a way, instead of, just a goofy video where I was quoted terribly on Facebook the other day on how to bend over, and this person demonstrating did a terrible job. But if they just did a golfer's lift and pull the hip through, I just did that with zero stress on my back. Zero stress on the nerve roots, zero stress on the discs, etc. No one had ever shown that person how to do that. So the book then shows them how to tie their shoes, how to pick their keys off the ground, how to get off the toilet. In other words, in very stress-reducing ways. It winds down the pain sensitivity. Then we show them the big 3 for spine stability and how to choose the right number of sets and reps and time of day. Excuse me. And then we say, well, if you scored this on your test, let's have a look at some hip mobility. But if you scored fine on it, don't need hip mobility. You've got plenty. And then the last part of the book transfers it into real life, into the loaded push-pull, lift, carry pattern. So when they follow that, to answer your question now, yes, they are so much better. Do you really want to roll the dice? Now, there are 5% of people, we give them a checklist. If you check every box, you've just increased your chance for success of surgery. The surgery target is at one level. If a surgeon says, I'm going to do a 2 or 3 level fusion, I'd run the other way. I would go get a second and even a third opinion, because you don't see very many successful patients who are better off after than they were before. And, it's interesting. The statistics show 10 years later, you can't tell based on their current presentation and past history who had surgery and who didn't. So I think when people are told the truth, and that's always been my thing, I'm not here to say, you do this or do that. My answers are almost always, well, look, it depends. Here's the information you need to make the decision.
Yeah, no, that's super crucial. And the last thing that I would like to touch on in regards to injury is creating blood flow around an injury, and in particular, injury on the back. Blood flow can be very healing to the joint, but how would you go about that without causing any stress to the joint for say, a lower back injury?
I don't think about it.
Okay.
It's not a significant modulator for most people to worry about. If that's the level of what you're working at, you're missing the big stuff.
Okay, cool.
So, all the capillary beds are there, and it's not going to, as I said, get the big stuff right. Figure out what the cause of pain is and get rid of that, and then build appropriate stability and mobility, and blood flow will just happen.
That's unreal. Thank you so much. This has been very insightful. We've got 2 last questions that we ask all of our guests, which is more about you, yourself.
Yeah, not really related to backs.
But
this is the zinger round.
Yeah, exactly. So the first one being is, what is your biggest driver, Stu? What gets you out of bed daily and keeps you doing what you do?
Oh, life. I love it. Just get out there and raise a little hell every day. Well, this may sound funny. I'm in my 60s now. My wife won't appreciate this, but I wake up every morning like I'm 16. I'm raring to go and just have a great day.
Yeah.
And then I look in the mirror and I think, holy hell, that can't be me. But no, every day I'm just, I get up, I take the dog for a walk, I go do a bit of physical labor around here, then I might see a patient, I might meet with colleagues, I might do a little fishing, I might come in here and train,
That's awesome.
Whatever. I love everything.
That's so good. Well, then the final question is, what's your biggest fear? Is there anything that scares you?
Well, lots scare me, but I don't know if I have a big fear. A big fear. I could give you a funny answer to that, but I don't know. I don't. My fear used to be, I'll die before my kids get going, but they're all grown up and got their own lives, so really no one cares about me anymore. So no one depends on me anymore. So I really don't have any.
Your puppy does.
The sporting community.
Oh. Well, yeah, but that's a one-sided fear. He's like me. He just takes everything and just loves it.
That's awesome. What was the funny answer you were going to give?
Oh, I was going to say something like clowns. I fear clowns, and I was so really.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If people want to reach out to you, is it best to get to you through your website?
Backfitpro.com.
Yeah, yes, but a word of warning. I don't know what social media is, and my daughter does it for me. So I do. Apparently, I have a Facebook page, and I say yes. Just put on content. Don't tell them that I'm out. Whatever. So I don't have time for it. I'm out trying to be a master of the craft. I'm trying to do things. I can't discuss it, or do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, I think it's very
I'm not a
valuable.
terrific guy for getting into discussions with people. I just it's not possible with
Yeah.
my time.
Definitely. So it's best they get hold of your books and listen to your interviews and
Oh,
things like
exactly.
that.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's your role in all of this. So
Yeah.
if you can help with that. So, well, thank you very much for all you do. It's been a little bit of fun to share this time with you. So thank you.
Likewise, I'd like to
Absolutely.
say
Thank
thank
you.
you for all the work you've done and being able to help, like, not only me but thousands of other people. I'm sure, and there's nothing worse than an injury, and
Debilitating.
or
You're
especially
right.
a lower back injury. It's terrible. So I know exactly what that feels like to be in that hurt, and I guess what you do and what you've been able to do so far has been amazing because it's helped so many people around the world, which is awesome in all sporting communities. So thank you for all
Yeah.
you do. And listeners, if you've enjoyed this, please share it around because I know even like there's still so much you can learn from Stu and everything he's doing. So please get hold of his books, pass this podcast around because
Do his course in October.
exactly it's so valuable and it will only help you and others around you.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome, Stu.
So
Thank you.
thank
Have
you.
a
Bye
lovely
bye.
day. Bye.
Thanks.